The grand hall shimmered with strange lights. Princess Lyria stood alone at the far corner, watching everyone else laugh and dance. Her silver skin carried dark lines that ran across her hands and face like black rivers. These marks made her different from all the other Valorians. They made her someone the nobles avoided. She watched her sister, Princess Selene, move through the crowd with grace. Selene's skin was perfect and smooth. Every noble wanted to talk to her. Every lord wanted to marry her. But when those same nobles looked at Lyria, they turned away quickly. Some even looked disgusted. Lyria was used to it. She had spent 20 years being ignored, being treated like a mistake. The dark marks on her skin were a genetic difference, something that appeared when she was born. The doctors had told her parents she would be weak and sick. They had been wrong. Lyria was healthy and strong, but the marks remained. Far away in space, Commander Jake Morrison sat in a meeting room on the human ship called Horizon's Edge. He was reading files about the Valorian Empire. The humans wanted to make friends with the Valorians, to create an alliance between their worlds. Jake was the cultural liaison. His job was to understand the Valorians and help both sides work together. He had studied their language for months. He had learned about their customs and their history, but the files about Princess Lyria were very short. They barely mentioned her at all. Ambassador Helen Carter looked at Jake with serious eyes. "Remember the rules," she said. "The Valorians care a lot about rank and order. Be polite to their royal family. Follow their traditions. And do not mention their civil war." Jake nodded. He had read about the war that happened 300 years ago. It was a dark time in Valorian history, something they preferred to forget. 2 days later, the human ship arrived at Valor Prime. Jake stood with the other diplomats as they traveled down to the planet. His heart beat fast with excitement. This was what he had always wanted, to meet new species and learn about other worlds. The palace was beautiful beyond anything Jake had imagined. Tall towers reached into the purple sky. Gardens full of alien plants stretched in every direction. The Valorian people moved with perfect grace, their silver skin catching the light. The welcome ceremony took place in a huge hall. Emperor Theron sat on his throne with Empress Mira beside him. Princess Selene stood to their right, looking beautiful and proud. But Jake noticed the empty space on the Emperor's left side. Someone was missing. Ambassador Carter gave speeches and presented gifts. The ceremony was formal and careful. Jake watched the Valorian nobles watching them. They all looked perfect, with smooth skin and proud faces. They seemed to judge the humans with every glance. That evening, there was a formal dinner. Jake sat with the other humans, eating strange food and trying to be polite. He was looking around the room when he saw her. Princess Lyria entered through a side door. She moved quietly, trying not to draw attention. But Jake noticed her right away. She wore dark blue robes that covered most of her body. Her hands and face showed the dark marks clearly. Jake watched as Lyria sat down at the far end of the royal table. The Valorian nobles near her moved their chairs away, creating empty space around her. The princess kept her eyes down, eating alone while everyone else talked and laughed. Something about the scene bothered Jake. Back home in Nevada, his family never let anyone eat alone. Everyone belonged at the table. Without thinking too much about it, Jake stood up and walked across the hall. "Excuse me," he said in Valorian language. "May I sit with you, Your Highness?" Princess Lyria looked up fast, her purple eyes wide with shock. The talking around them stopped. Jake could feel everyone staring at him, but he kept looking at the princess. "You want to sit here?" Lyria asked quietly. "If you don't mind," Jake said with a smile. "I don't know anyone at this party. I was hoping for some company." Lyria stared at him for a long moment. Then she pointed to the empty chair next to her. "Please." Jake sat down. He saw Ambassador Carter making angry hand signals from across the room, but he ignored her. He had made his choice. "I'm Jake Morrison," he said, holding out his hand. "I work with the Earth Alliance." Lyria looked at his hand like she wasn't sure what to do. Then, She placed her hand in his. Her skin felt cool. Jake could feel the raised lines of the dark marks under his fingers. "Princess Lyria Valtherin," she said. "But I think you already knew that." "I did," Jake admitted. "But the files didn't tell me much about you. They were very short." A sad smile crossed Lyria's face. "That does not surprise me. I'm not exactly a popular topic in the palace." For the next hour, Jake and Lyria talked. He found her easy to talk to, and very smart. She knew a lot about biology and different cultures. She asked good questions about Earth, about human society, and about why humans had gone to space. "We were told that humans are warriors," Lyria said. "That you fight a lot." Jake shrugged. "We've had our fights. But mostly, we're curious. We wanted to know what was out there. We wanted to meet others who looked at the stars. Some species thought that was dangerous. And now? Now we're trying to show we can be more than what others expect." He looked at her. "I think you might understand that." Lyria's face softened. "Maybe I do." Then Princess Celine walked over. She moved like a hunter, smooth and confident. "Sister," she said in a sweet voice, "I see you've trapped one of our guests." "How clever." Jake stood up, keeping his voice polite but firm. "Actually, I asked to sit with the princess. She's been a great host." Celine's eyes showed surprise for just a moment. Then she smiled again. "How interesting. Humans really are unpredictable." She turned to Lyria. "Try not to bore our guests with your strange interests, dear sister. We want them to like our empire." Celine walked away before anyone could answer. Jake sat back down, feeling angry. "Is she always like that?" "That was her being nice," Lyria said quietly. "You should leave, Commander Morrison. Being seen with me won't help your mission." "Let me worry about that," Jake said. He pulled out his data device. "You said you were interested in Earth books. I have some files I could share." Lyria stared at him for a long moment. Her eyes looked hopeful and scared at the same time. "I would like that very much." As Jake started sending files to Lyria's device, he didn't see all the nobles watching them. He didn't see Emperor Theron's thoughtful look or Empress Mira's worried frown. He didn't notice Lord Varen, the most powerful noble in the Empire, watching with calculating eyes. All Jake saw was a lonely princess who deserved better treatment. And Jake Morrison had never been good at walking away from people who needed a friend. The next morning, news of what Jake had done spread through the palace like fire. Every noble knew that the human commander had not only talked to Princess Lyria, but had seemed to enjoy it. Some thought he was foolish. Others thought he was dangerous. But everyone agreed that something unusual had happened. Jake woke up to find Ambassador Carter standing in his room, looking angry. "What were you thinking?" she demanded. "I had dinner with a princess," Jake said. "Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" "3. Not with her," Carter said. She showed him a holographic display of Valorian society. "Princess Lyria is untouchable. Those marks make her impure by their standards. You broke their social rules. By being kind? By treating her as an equal when their whole society says she isn't." Carter rubbed her face. "Look, I understand you meant well, but we're here to make friends, not to challenge their culture." Jake stood up. "Ambassador, I didn't join the diplomatic service to pretend that being kind depends on someone's rank. If the Valorians have a problem with me treating a princess with respect, that's their issue." Carter sighed. "You sound like my son. He studies social justice in college." She gave him a tired smile. "I admire your principles, Jake. But principles can start wars. Just be careful." After she left, Jake looked out the window at the palace gardens. Somewhere down there was Lyria, probably facing her own problems for talking to him. His communication device beeped. A message appeared in Valorian writing. His translator changed it to English. "Commander Morrison, if you wish, I would be honored to show you the palace archives. They have historical records that might interest you." Princess Lyria. 1. Jake smiled and typed his answer. I would love that. When should I meet you? He didn't know it yet. But that simple acceptance would change everything. The archives were in the oldest part of the palace. Long hallways stretched in every direction, filled with shelves holding data crystals and ancient books. Lyria waited at the entrance, wearing formal robes that still couldn't hide the dark marks on her skin. Thank you for coming, she said. I thought maybe after last night, you might have been warned to stay away. Oh, I was definitely warned, Jake said cheerfully. I decided to ignore it. Lyria laughed. The sound was genuine and happy, making her whole face light up. You humans really are strange. Come, let me show you something special. She led him deep into the archives, past rows of carefully stored materials. Jake noticed several workers watching them with disapproving looks. But Lyria seemed used to such reactions. They stopped in front of a large display case. Inside was a piece of old stone covered with carved symbols. This, Lyria said, is part of the first treaty. Long ago, before the Valorian Empire became obsessed with genetic perfection, our ancestors believed that diversity made us strong. Different bloodlines, different abilities, all working together. Jake looked at the ancient carving. What changed? War? Disease? Fear? Lyria's voice became distant. About 800 years ago, a terrible sickness spread through our people. Millions died. After that, the survivors decided that genetic purity was the only way to stay safe. They made strict rules about breeding. They removed anything they thought was a flaw. She touched the dark marks on her hand. They missed one, apparently. But you're healthy, Jake said. The marks don't hurt you, right? No. Medical tests actually show that the genetic variation might make certain parts of my brain work better. But that doesn't matter to the court. How you look is everything to them. For the next few hours, they explored the archives together. Lyria was a wonderful teacher, making old history feel alive and exciting. Jake found himself fascinated by her knowledge and her unique way of seeing things. You should teach, Jake said. At a university or research center. You're really good at this. Lyria's expression became sad. That would never be allowed. I'm royal property, Jake. Useful for continuing the bloodline, but not for anything that would put me in public view. She paused. Can I ask you something personal? Nuss. Quote. Sure. Last night, when you sat with me, you knew it would cause problems. Why did you do it? Jake thought about his answer. Where I come from, we believe everyone deserves a seat at the table. But it is, Lyria insisted. You risked your mission, your reputation with your own people, just to be kind to a stranger. That's not simple. That's extraordinary. Before Jake could respond, the archive door opened. There you are, Celine said, sounding falsely concerned. Father has been looking for you, sister. He's very upset that you're taking up our guest's time. I invited the commander here, Lyria said, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. We were discussing Valorian history. How boring for him. Celine turned to Jake with a beautiful smile. Commander Morrison, I hope my sister hasn't exhausted you. Perhaps you would enjoy seeing our military facilities instead? Something more interesting for humans? Jake recognized the power play. Actually, I've found Princess Lyria's knowledge of your culture very valuable. This is exactly the kind of cultural exchange I was hoping for. Celine's smile froze. I see. Well, Father still wants to speak with Lyria. Right now. Lyria nodded, her face carefully neutral. Of course. Commander Morrison, thank you for your time. As she moved toward the door, Jake called out, Princess Lyria? She turned back. Same time tomorrow. I'd love to continue learning. He could see the shock in her eyes, quickly followed by something that looked like gratitude. I would like that very much. Go. After they left, Jake stood alone among the old records. He was starting to understand that his presence here meant more than just diplomatic relations. Sometimes change needed someone willing to break the rules. Someone too stubborn to accept that things had to stay the same. Jake Morrison had never been good at knowing when to quit. That evening, he was called to meet with Emperor Theron. Jake expected to be scolded, maybe even sent away from the planet. Instead, he found himself in a private study, facing a ruler who looked more tired than angry. "Sit, Commander Morrison," the Emperor said, pointing to a chair. "We need to talk about my daughter." Theron poured 2 glasses of deep blue liquid and handed one to Jake. The human took it carefully, noting the tension in the Emperor's posture. "Do you know why I agreed to meet with the Earth Alliance?" Theron asked, settling into his chair. "Several of my advisors argued against it. Humans have a reputation for being disruptive, for challenging the established order." "I know our reputation," Jake said carefully. "I argued in your favor because I believed that disruption might be exactly what the Valorian Empire needs." The Emperor took a long drink. "For 800 years, we have pursued genetic perfection. We have created a society of flawless individuals. And in doing so, we have lost something important." Jake waited, sensing that interrupting would be wrong. "Lyria was born with those marks," Theron continued. "The doctors told us she would be weak and die young. They said she might have brain problems. They suggested we announce her death and dispose of the body quietly. It had been done before, with royal children, who didn't meet standards." The casual way he said it made Jake's stomach turn, but he kept his face calm. "I refused. My wife and I had already lost 2 children before birth. I wasn't willing to lose another, no matter how she looked." Theron's eyes became distant. Lyria grew up healthy and brilliant. The marks had no bad effects. But by then, too many people knew about her. We couldn't hide her, and we couldn't present her as a proper heir. "So you kept her isolated," Jake said quietly, "for her own safety as much as anything. The noble houses saw her as an embarrassment, a threat to their own perfect bloodlines. There have been 3 attempts to kill her over the years." Theron looked at Jake. "And yet, you walked across a dinner hall and sat beside her like it was the most natural thing in the world." "It was the most natural thing in the world," Jake replied. "She's a person. She deserves to be treated like one. Spoken like a human." Theron almost smiled. "You've caused quite a disturbance in the court, Commander. Lord Varen has demanded your immediate removal. Several noble houses have made formal complaints. And yet, for the first time in 20 years, I've seen my daughter smile." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't mean to create political problems, Your Majesty." "Oh, but I think you did." The Emperor stood and walked to the window. "Or rather, you didn't care if you did, which is the same thing. Tell me, Commander Morrison, what do humans do when they encounter something they consider unjust?" "We try to change it, even when told it's not your place." Jake thought about his grandmother, who had marched for equal rights. About his father, who had fought to include different species on the same ships. "Especially then, Your Majesty." Theron nodded slowly. "The gathering of bonds begins in 3 days. It's our most important social event of the year. Alliances are formed, and marriages are arranged. Celine will have her choice of suitors from the most powerful noble houses in the Empire. And Princess Lyria will be present, but ignored, as always." Theron turned back to Jake. "Unless someone were to publicly request her company, to name her as their chosen partner for the ceremonial dances." Jake understood immediately what the Emperor was suggesting. "That would be a declaration of intent, wouldn't it? In Valorian culture?" Number 5. "This well, whence he seeking." Number 5. Number 5. Number 5. "It would signal serious romantic interest. Yes. And it would force the noble houses to acknowledge Lyria as a legitimate member of the royal family, worthy of being courted." Theron's face was hard to read. It would also make you a target for every ambitious lord who sees Lyria as an obstacle to their plans for the throne. You want me to paint a target on both our backs. I want to give my daughter a chance at happiness. And I want to see if the Valorian Empire is still capable of change, or if we've bred ourselves into permanent rigidity. The Emperor moved closer. I'm not asking you to marry her, Commander. I'm asking you to show the court that she has value, that someone from outside our strict hierarchy sees worth in what they consider worthless. Jake thought about Ambassador Carter's warnings, about the careful diplomatic balance he was supposed to maintain. Then he thought about Lyria's laugh in the archives, the way her eyes had lit up when she talked about history. I'll do it, he said. But I want your word that Lyria won't face consequences if this goes wrong. You have it. Theron held out his hand, and Jake shook it. Fair warning, Commander Morrison. You're about to make some very powerful enemies. I've been making enemies since I was 6 and punched Billy Stevens for picking on the new kid, Jake said with a grin. I'm used to it. Over the next 2 days, Jake continued to spend time with Lyria, this time more publicly. They walked through the palace gardens. They attended cultural performances together. They even sat together during a formal lunch with visiting dignitaries. Each appearance generated more gossip and more disapproval from the Valorian nobles. But Jake also noticed something else. Lower-ranking courtiers, servants, and palace staff watched them with expressions that ranged from curiosity to approval. In the markets outside the palace, where humans from the horizon's edge mixed with Valorian citizens, people whispered about the commander who had befriended the marked princess. The night before the gathering of bonds, Lyria asked Jake to meet her in the archives one last time. He found her standing before the fragment of the first treaty, her face troubled. You don't have to do this, she said without turning around. I know what Father asked of you. I know what the gathering means. He told you? He tells me everything eventually. We're closer than most people know. Jake, if you name me at the gathering, you'll be making a statement that will follow you for the rest of your life. The noble houses won't forget or forgive. Even if you return to Earth, they'll remember the human who defied their social order. Sounds like a pretty good legacy to me, Jake said. This isn't a joke. Lyria's voice rose with frustration. You're risking everything for someone you barely know. Why? Jake moved to stand beside her, looking at the ancient treaty. Do you know why humans finally made it to the stars? It wasn't because we had better technology or bigger weapons. It was because we stopped accepting that things had to be the way they'd always been. We looked at systems that told people they were worth less because of how they were born, and we said no. That fight never really ends, Lyria. Every generation has to choose whether to accept injustice or challenge it. And you've chosen to challenge it here. I've chosen to stand beside someone who deserves better than she's gotten. If that challenges the system, fine. Lyria was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand, her cool fingers wrapping around his. I've spent my entire life being told I was wrong, that my existence was a mistake. And then you appeared, acting like being kind to me was the most obvious thing in the world. You have no idea what that's meant to me. I think I might, Jake said softly. They stood together in the old archive, surrounded by the weight of history and the promise of change. Tomorrow would bring the gathering of bonds, and with it, a confrontation that had been building for far longer than the few days Jake had been on Valor Prime. The next evening, the Grand Hall looked completely different. Glowing decorations created a ceiling of false stars. Floating platforms drifted through the space, giving performers and nobles places to stand and talk. Every important family in the Valorian Empire had sent representatives, all dressed in fancy ceremonial clothes that showed their genetic perfection. Jake wore his formal Earth Alliance dress uniform, the deep blue fabric marked with his rank badges. He stood with Ambassador Carter and the other humans, watching as the Valorian royals entered. Emperor Theron and Empress Mira came first, followed by Princess Celine, who wore robes of shimmering gold that caught everyone's attention. Behind her, almost unnoticed, came Princess Lyria in midnight blue that somehow made the dark marks on her skin look like rivers of shadow rather than flaws. The ceremonial dances began. Celine moved from partner to partner, each noble lord more important than the last. Lord Varen himself, the most powerful man in the Empire after the Emperor, danced with her third, a clear statement of his intentions. Jake waited. Rules said he should ask permission from Emperor Theron before approaching either princess. But he had spent the last 2 days studying Valorian history with Lyria, and he had found something interesting in the old records. When the fourth dance began, Jake walked onto the floor. He didn't go to the Emperor. He didn't ask permission from any noble lord. Instead, he walked directly to where Lyria stood at the edge of the gathering and bowed deeply. "Princess Lyria Valtheron," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "Would you honor me with this dance?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. What Jake had done was more than break protocol. By approaching Lyria directly, using her full formal title, and requesting a dance without asking approval first, he had invoked an ancient custom that existed before the modern empire. He had challenged anyone who objected to state their opposition publicly. Lyria stared at him, her eyes wide. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. She placed her marked hand in his and let him lead her onto the dance floor. The music started again, and they began to move. Jake had practiced Valorian dance forms for weeks, knowing this moment might come, but he found that with Lyria, the steps felt natural, like they'd been dancing together for years. "You used the old claim," Lyria whispered. "Then we're overdue," Jake replied. Around them, the other dancers had stopped. All eyes were on the human commander and the marked princess, moving together as if no one else existed. Lord Varen stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "This is outrageous. The old claim is meant for those of equal standing. This human has no right to use it. The old claim requires only that the one who makes it be willing to defend their choice," Emperor Theron said, his voice calm but carrying throughout the hall. "Are you challenging Commander Morrison's right to dance with my daughter, Lord Varen?" The noble lord's jaw tightened. A direct challenge would mean a formal duel. While Jake was young and didn't know all Valorian customs, he had the backing of both the Emperor and Earth Alliance military training. "It would be messy and uncertain." "Of course not, Your Majesty," Varen said finally. "I was merely noting the irregularity." "Noted," Theron replied. The dance continues. As Jake and Lyria resumed their movement, he could feel the weight of 1,000 stares. The Valorian nobles were rethinking everything they thought they knew. The marked princess they had ignored for 20 years was being publicly honored by an alien who had no reason to care about their social rules. And in that moment, in that dance, everything changed. The days following the gathering were chaotic. The entire Valorian Empire seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Jake's public claim of Lyria had done exactly what Emperor Theron had hoped. It forced the court to acknowledge her as a legitimate member of the royal family. But it had also painted targets on both their backs. The first attempt on Jake's life came 3 days later. He was returning to his room when instinct made him duck. An energy bolt burned the wall where his head had been. His combat training took over immediately. Jake's that was in Stender. Let 7 maniport. Jake's that one of on. Enter Jake's life. Energy bolt. He rolled behind a pillar as 2 more shots rang out. "Security!" he shouted, drawing the plasma weapon he'd started carrying since the gathering. Palace guards arrived within seconds, but the attacker had vanished through the service corridors. Emperor Theron personally came to investigate. "Were you hurt?" "Emperor." "Just my pride," Jake said, putting away his weapon. "Any idea who sent them?" "Half a dozen noble houses would benefit from your death," Theron admitted. "Take this seriously, Commander. You've disrupted decades of careful political balance." The second attempt targeted Lyria. She was in the archives when a maintenance machine malfunctioned, its gravity systems failing directly above her. Only Jake's quick reaction, pulling her aside as the heavy device crashed down, saved her from serious injury. "This is getting ridiculous," Jake muttered, checking her for wounds. "Are you okay?" Lyria nodded, but her hands were shaking. "This is my life, Jake. It's always been like this. And now you're in danger too. Then we deal with it together." That evening, Jake called an emergency meeting with Ambassador Carter and the senior staff of the Horizon's Edge. Captain Roy Bennett, an old veteran with 30 years of service, listened to Jake's report with growing concern. "You've really made a mess this time, Morrison," Bennett said, but there was no real anger in his voice. "What do you need from us?" "I need to know if Earth Alliance is going to support me," Jake said directly. "Because, if we run away now, we're telling every species in the galaxy that humans talk about justice, but abandon it when it gets hard." Carter rubbed her face. "The diplomatic consequences could be serious. So could the benefits," Jake argued. "We've made more real connections with ordinary Valorians in the past week than in all our formal talks. People are discussing the human who stood up for their princess. That means something." Bennett leaned back in his chair. "Command isn't going to like this, but I'll support you. We didn't come all the way out here to be cowards." He fixed Jake with a hard look. "But you need to be smart about this. No more grand gestures without backup." Over the next several weeks, Jake and Lyria's relationship became the center of Valorian politics. Every public appearance was analyzed. Every interaction was studied. But something unexpected began to happen. Lower-ranking nobles, those who had their own reasons to resent the strict hierarchy, started speaking out in support of Princess Lyria. Scientists published papers examining her genetic markers, showing that the variations actually improved certain brain functions. Artists created works, celebrating diversity rather than uniformity. "You've started a movement," Lieutenant Kate Palmer told Jake one evening, showing him the latest data from the networks. "People are calling it the New Harmony," referencing the old First Treaty. "They're arguing for a return to valuing diversity over perfection." But the opposition was equally strong. Lord Varen had emerged as the leader of the traditional faction, using his considerable influence to turn other noble houses against the Emperor's apparent acceptance of his daughter's relationship with the human. The crisis reached its peak during a session of the Imperial Council. Jake was invited to attend as a representative of Earth Alliance interests, sitting in the observation area while the Valorian nobles debated their empire's future. "The human's presence has destabilized our entire social structure," Lord Varen declared, his voice carrying through the chamber. "He has violated our customs, endangered our princess, and encouraged rebellion among the lower classes. For the good of the Empire, Earth Alliance must be asked to leave." "And what message would that send?" Lyria's voice rang out clearly. She stood from her seat in the royal section, drawing shocked looks from the assembled nobles. The marked princess almost never spoke at council sessions. "Princess Lyria," Varen said with false politeness, "this discussion is for those experienced in governing. I am a princess of the imperial bloodline," Lyria said, her voice steady and strong. "And I have as much right to speak here as anyone else. You say Commander Morrison has destabilized our society. I say he has revealed weaknesses that were already there. For 800 years, we have pursued genetic perfection at the cost of our own souls. We have become so obsessed with how we look that we've forgotten what we're supposed to stand for." She walked down to the council floor, her dark-marked hands clearly visible to everyone present. "Look at me. Really look at me. I am marked. Yes, by your standards, I am flawed. But I am also brilliant, educated, and capable. I could serve this empire in a dozen ways, but I have been hidden away because my appearance doesn't match your ideals of perfection." "Your Highness," another lord interrupted, "surely you understand that standards must be maintained." "Standards?" Lyria's laugh was bitter. "We have standards that value appearance over ability, breeding over merit. We have standards that would have killed me at birth if my father had been weaker. Are those the standards you wish to maintain?" "How?" The chamber erupted in argument. Jake watched from the observation area, his heart pounding hard. This was Lyria's moment, and she was magnificent. Emperor Theron finally stood, and silence fell. My daughter speaks truth that many of us have been afraid to acknowledge. The Valorian Empire stands at a crossroads. We can continue down our current path, becoming ever more rigid and exclusive. Or we can remember what our ancestors knew, that diversity is not weakness, but strength. And if we reject this wisdom, Lord Varen challenged, will you force change upon us? No, Theron said. I will allow the people to choose. I am calling for a public vote on the genetic purity laws. Let the citizens of the Empire decide what values we should uphold. The chamber exploded into chaos. A public vote on the genetic laws was something that had never happened before. But Theron had made his decision, and even Lord Varen couldn't challenge an emperor's direct decree. Later that night, Jake found Lyria in the gardens, staring up at the stars. He sat beside her without speaking, offering silent support. I've never spoken like that before, Lyria said finally. In public, where everyone could hear me, where they had to listen. You were amazing, Jake told her. You said everything that needed to be said, because you showed me it was possible, because you looked at me and saw value when everyone else saw a mistake. Jake Morrison, you have turned my entire world upside down. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Lyria smiled. I'm still deciding. The vote was scheduled for 30 days later, giving both sides time to make their case to the public. Jake found himself pulled into the campaign, speaking at gatherings about human values and the importance of judging individuals by their character rather than their genetics. But he also made sure to spend time with Lyria away from the political storm. They explored the wilderness areas beyond the palace, where alien plants created landscapes of breathtaking beauty. They shared meals in quiet corners, talking about everything from philosophy to their favorite foods. Slowly, what had begun as a political statement was becoming something deeper. I never thought I would care about someone like this, Lyria admitted one evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. It wasn't allowed for me. Marriage was meant to be a duty, something arranged for political benefit. Not this. Not what? Jake asked softly. Not something I chose for myself. Not something that makes me feel like I'm finally living, instead of just existing. Jake took her hand, feeling the cool skin and the ridges of her unique genetics. Whatever happens with the vote, whatever the future holds, I want you to know something. Meeting you, getting to know you, it's been the most important thing I've ever done. Not for diplomacy or politics, but because you're extraordinary, Lyria. And I'm incredibly lucky that you're in my life. Lyria leaned her head against his shoulder. The vote could fail. Lord Varen and his allies have tremendous power. Then we'll deal with that together, Jake said. One way or another, we'll find a way forward. Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, uncaring about the struggles of those below. But Jake and Lyria sat together in the fading light, two people from different worlds who had found something worth fighting for in each other. The 30 days before the vote passed in a blur of activity. Both sides campaigned hard, with Lord Varen's traditional faction arguing for the preservation of Valorian genetic standards, while the reform movement, now officially called the New Harmony Coalition, advocated for change. Jake found himself becoming a symbol for the reform movement, whether he wanted to be or not. His daily walks with Lyria were recorded by news services across the Empire. Every speech he gave was analyzed and discussed. The human who had dared to court the marked princess had become the face of a revolution he hadn't intended to start. You're handling the attention well, Lieutenant Kate Palmer told him one morning, reviewing the latest polling data. Public opinion is actually shifting in your favor. The younger generation especially is embracing the New Harmony message. But will it be enough? Jake asked. Kate's expression turned serious. It's going to be close. Varen has the establishment locked down, and a lot of older Valorians fear change. This could go either way. 2 weeks before the vote, tragedy struck. An explosion ripped through a New Harmony rally in one of the Empire's secondary cities. 15 people died, including 3 prominent reform activists. Within hours, evidence emerged that the bomb had been planted by extreme traditionalists. The violence shocked the Empire. Emperor Theron addressed the nation, his voice heavy with grief and anger. "We have allowed our disagreements to turn into hatred. We have let fear of change drive us to terrible acts. This must end." Lord Varen, sensing the tide turning against him, made a calculated move. He publicly condemned the bombing and called for unity. But Jake could see the cold calculation behind the gesture. Varen was protecting his position, not actually changing his beliefs. But the bombing had an unexpected effect. Moderate Valorians, who had been undecided, began moving toward the reform position. The violence had made the cost of rigid traditionalism brutally clear. 3 days before the vote, Lyria received a death threat so specific and credible that palace security confined her to her quarters. Jake, refusing to leave her side, moved into the adjacent room. They spent those days in strange isolation, knowing that the Empire's future was being decided while they sat under guard. "I've been thinking," Lyria said one evening, sitting on a couch in her study, "about what happens after the vote. What about it? If the vote passes, everything changes. The genetic purity laws will be gone. People like me will have opportunities we never had before." She paused. "But if it fails, I don't know what happens. Father can't protect me forever from the noble houses, and you'll need to return to Earth eventually." Jake moved to sit beside her. "Then we'll figure it out together. Earth Alliance has multiple embassies throughout this sector. I could request a permanent posting here, or you could come to Earth. There are many possibilities. You would stay here, give up your career advancement to remain in an empire that might never fully accept you?" "Without hesitation," Jake said. "Lyria, these past weeks with you have been the most real thing I've ever experienced. I'm not walking away from that." Lyria was quiet for a long moment. Then she kissed him, and in that kiss was gratitude and fear and hope, all tangled together. The day of the vote arrived. All across the Valorian Empire, citizens cast their votes through secure digital networks. The polls closed at sunset on Valor Prime, and the counting began immediately. Jake stood with Lyria and her family in the Emperor's private chambers, watching the results stream in. Ambassador Carter was there, along with Captain Bennett and Kate Palmer, representing Earth Alliance's interest in the outcome. The early returns were promising. Urban centers and younger voters overwhelmingly supported reform, but as results came in from the traditional strongholds and rural areas, the gap narrowed dramatically. "It's going to be close," Empress Mira said, her voice tight with tension. "Far closer than I hoped." Hour after hour, they watched the numbers change. Sometimes the reform movement led by a few percentage points. Sometimes traditional forces pulled ahead. The entire empire seemed to be holding its breath. Finally, at 3 a.m. local time, the final results were certified. The vote had passed by a margin of 51.4% to 48.6%. The genetic purity laws were officially gone. Lyria collapsed into Jake's arms, tears streaming down her face. Emperor Theron embraced his daughter, his own eyes wet. Even practical Ambassador Carter looked moved by the moment. "It's over," Lyria whispered. "It's finally over." But Jake knew it wasn't really over. Outside the palace, he could hear the sounds of celebration from New Harmony supporters and angry protests from traditionalists. This wasn't an ending, but a beginning. The first step of a much longer journey. The next morning, Emperor Theron addressed the Empire from the palace balcony. Jake stood beside Lyria as her father spoke about unity, healing, and the difficult work of building a better future together. "The vote has spoken," Theron declared, "and now we must all live with its decision. To those who supported reform, I say, be kind in victory. To those who opposed it, I say your voices matter too." and we will need your wisdom as we navigate these changes. Lord Varen was in the crowd below, his expression carefully blank. Jake knew the noble lord hadn't given up. Men like Varen never truly surrendered. But for now, at least, the fight had been won. In the weeks that followed, Jake watched as Lyria grew in ways he'd never imagined. Freed from the constraints that had defined her entire life, she took on an official role as cultural liaison between the Valorian Empire and Earth Alliance. She gave lectures at the Imperial University, sharing the historical knowledge she'd spent years gathering in isolation. She was brilliant, and finally, the world could see it. Jake received a promotion to senior diplomatic officer, giving him a permanent position on Valor Prime. Ambassador Carter, perhaps recognizing that some disruptions were worth the trouble they caused, supported his posting. "You know," she told him one day, "when I first met you, I thought you were going to be my biggest headache. Turns out, you were exactly what this mission needed." 6 months after the vote, Princess Celine announced her engagement to Lord Varen's son in a match that surprised no one. It was a traditional alliance, carefully calculated for political benefit. 1 week later, Princess Lyria and Commander Jake Morrison announced their own engagement. The wedding would blend Valorian and Earth traditions, symbolizing the joining of two worlds that had found common ground in the most unexpected way. The ceremony took place in the palace gardens, with guests from across the Empire and representatives from a dozen alien species. Lyria wore traditional Valorian wedding robes in deep blue, her dark-marked hands wrapped with ceremonial ribbons. Jake wore his dress uniform, standing tall beside her. Emperor Theron officiated, speaking words that had been used in Valorian weddings for thousands of years. "We gather to witness the bonding of two souls, the joining of two lives into one shared journey." But it was Lyria's vows that brought tears to many eyes. "Jake Morrison came to my world as a stranger and showed me that kindness requires no permission, and respect needs no justification. He looked at what others called a flaw and saw only possibility. Today, I pledge myself to him not because tradition demands it, but because my heart cannot imagine any other choice." Jake's own vows were simpler. "Lyria, you taught me that the most important adventures aren't found in space, but in the courage to stand beside someone and say this person matters. I promise to spend the rest of my life proving that I meant it." As they exchanged the traditional Valorian bonding crystals and Earth's wedding rings, Jake looked out at the assembled crowd. He saw Valorians with genetic variations that would have once condemned them to invisibility, now standing proud. He saw humans and aliens mixing freely, sharing in the celebration. The work wasn't finished. Lord Varen and his traditional allies still held considerable power. There would be setbacks and challenges ahead. But standing there with Lyria, feeling her cool hand in his, Jake knew that some battles were worth fighting. That evening, as the celebration continued into the night, Jake and Lyria slipped away to their favorite spot in the gardens. The alien flowers glowed softly around them, and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. "Did you ever imagine," Lyria asked, "when you first sat beside me at that dinner, that it would lead to all this?" Jake laughed. "I imagined making a friend. Everything else was improvisation." "Good improvisation," Lyria said, leaning against him. "The best kind." They sat in comfortable silence, two people from different worlds who had found something neither expected. Not just love, but partnership. Not just acceptance, but belonging. High above them, the horizon's edge maintained its orbit around Valor Prime, a reminder that Jake Morrison had come from the stars to this alien world. But as he held Lyria close, he knew that home wasn't about where you came from. It was about where you chose to be, and who you chose to be with. The months that followed brought both progress and resistance. The New Harmony Coalition grew stronger, establishing programs to help Valorians with genetic variations access education and employment that had been denied to them. Lyria became one of the movement's most visible leaders, using her platform to advocate for continued reform. But the traditionalists didn't go quietly. Lord Varen worked behind the scenes, using his influence to slow implementation of the new laws. There were protests and counter-protests. Several times, tensions threatened to boil over into violence. Jake found himself mediating between factions, using his position as an outsider to find common ground. He organized forums where both sides could speak and be heard. He helped draft policies that protected traditional Valorian culture, while opening opportunities for those who had been excluded. "You've become quite the politician," Captain Bennett told him during one of his visits to the Horizon's Edge. "Command is impressed with your work here." "I'm just trying to help people find a way forward," Jake said. "That's what good politics is supposed to be," Bennett replied. 1 year after the wedding, Lyria announced she was pregnant. The news spread quickly through the Empire, generating both excitement and concern. What would the child look like? Would they carry Lyria's genetic markers or not? "I don't care," Lyria told Jake one evening, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Whatever our child looks like, they'll be loved. They'll grow up in a world where being different isn't a death sentence. They'll grow up with you as their mother," Jake said. "That's the luckiest thing any kid could ask for." The baby was born on a warm spring day. She had her mother's violet eyes and her father's brown hair. And yes, she had the dark marks running across her tiny hands, visible proof of her mixed heritage. They named her Hope. The Empire watched to see how the child would be received. Emperor Theron held his granddaughter at a public ceremony. The dark marks on her skin, clearly visible to all. "This child represents our future," Theron declared. "A future where diversity strengthens us rather than divides us. A future where we judge individuals by their character and abilities rather than their genetics. Look at her and see not a flaw, but a bridge between worlds." The ceremony became a turning point. Seeing the Emperor embrace his marked granddaughter with such obvious love and pride shifted public opinion further. Even some traditionalists began to soften their positions. Lord Varen, recognizing that the tide had truly turned, finally made peace with the new order. He would never fully accept it, but he stopped actively fighting it. His son's marriage to Princess Celine gave him a connection to the throne that satisfied his ambitions. 5 years after Jake first sat beside Lyria at that fateful dinner, the Valorian Empire had transformed. Genetic diversity was not only accepted, but celebrated. Scientists had discovered that the genetic variations once considered flaws actually provided benefits, from enhanced cognitive abilities to greater disease resistance. The Empire had opened its universities and government positions to merit-based selection rather than bloodline. Innovation flourished as new perspectives and ideas were welcomed. The Valorian economy grew stronger, and their relationships with other species improved. Jake and Lyria raised Hope and later her younger brother, a boy they named Theron after his grandfather. The children grew up bilingual, learning both Valorian and English, comfortable in both human and alien cultures. They spent summers on Earth, where Hope and Theron played with their human cousins in Nevada. They spent winters on Valor Prime, where they learned about their Valorian heritage. They were living proof that different worlds could come together. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Jake and Lyria returned to the archives where they had first truly connected. The fragment of the first treaty still sat in its display case, a reminder of ancient wisdom rediscovered. "We've come a long way," Lyria said, studying the carved stone. "You've come a long way," Jake corrected. "I just sat down for dinner." Lyria laughed and took his hand. "You did more than that. You showed an entire empire that change was possible. That kindness and courage could overcome centuries of prejudice. We did it together," Jake insisted. "You found your voice. You stood up in that council chamber and demanded to be heard. That's what really changed things." They stood together in the quiet archive, surrounded by history they had helped create. Outside, the Empire continued its transformation. There would always be challenges, always people resistant to change, but the foundation had been laid for a better future. Ambassador Carter, now retired and living on Valor Prime, often told the story of the human commander who had disrupted everything by showing basic decency. It had become something of a legend, taught in diplomatic academies throughout human space. The Morrison approach, they called it. The idea that sometimes the best diplomacy wasn't careful negotiation but simple human kindness. That treating people with respect, regardless of what convention said, could accomplish more than any treaty. Jake found the attention embarrassing. He had never set out to change an empire or become a symbol. He had just wanted to be kind to someone who was eating alone. But Lyria understood the power of what he had done. "You showed me that I mattered," she told him. That simple act rippled outward and touched millions of lives. Never underestimate the power of choosing kindness. On Hope's 10th birthday, she asked her father about the story everyone told. "Did you really change the empire just by sitting next to Mom at dinner?" Jake knelt down to his daughter's level. "The empire changed itself, sweetheart. Your mother and her people did the hard work. I just refuse to accept that someone as wonderful as your mom should be treated badly. But you were scared, right, when you walked across that hall?" Jake thought about it. "A little. But sometimes, being brave means doing what's right, even when you're scared." Hope nodded seriously. Then she hugged her father tight. "I'm glad you were brave." "Doer." As Jake held his daughter, seeing Lyria's violet eyes looking up at him from a face that was half human, half Valorian, he felt a wave of gratitude for the chance that had brought him to this world, for the courage to follow his instincts, for the love he had found in the most unexpected place. The alien princess that every noble had shunned had found her champion. And the human who came forward had found something far more valuable than diplomatic success. He had found a home, a family, and a purpose. Together, they had proven that sometimes the greatest changes begin with the simplest acts. That kindness could challenge empires. That love could bridge worlds. That one person willing to stand up and say this isn't right could start a revolution. And in a galaxy full of wonders, perhaps that was the most extraordinary thing of all. Years would pass. The empire would continue to evolve. There would be successes and failures, progress and setbacks. But the foundation had been laid. The Valorian Empire had learned that diversity was strength, that difference should be celebrated rather than feared. Jake and Lyria grew old together, watching their children and eventually their grandchildren grow up in a world far different from the one they had known. A world where being different was no longer a curse, but a gift. And sometimes, late at night, they would return to that spot in the archives. They would stand before the fragment of the first treaty and remember the journey they had taken together. From a lonely princess eating dinner alone to a leader who had helped transform an empire. From a human diplomat on his first major assignment to a man who had found his place among the stars. The story of Jake Morrison and Princess Lyria became legend. It was told to children as a bedtime story. It was studied by historians as a turning point in Valorian history. It was referenced by diplomats as an example of how small acts of courage could change the world. But for Jake and Lyria, it was simply their life, their love story, their shared journey from that first moment, when a human commander walked across a dinner hall and chose kindness over convention. And that choice had made all the difference.